Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dash of Élan. Got another video for you. Today we're going to talk about scatter terrain. Not just any scatter terrain, but do-it-yourself scatter terrain. I'm a big fan of doing things yourself and getting your own stuff for your tabletop, whether you craft it or you just go in your backyard and break it off a tree. I'm a big fan of that, and I'm going to talk about that in this video today and show you some of the techniques I use to gather up my scatter terrain for my tabletop. When I say scatter terrain, I'm talking about the little bits and bobs of terrain that you literally scatter about your tabletop that usually is insignificant, doesn't play a role in the rules. It's basically there for looks. Whether or not you actually put it on a base and glue it on there and sculpt things and put trees next to it is a different story. I'm talking about just bits and bobs that you scatter around your terrain, maybe as a forest floor. You got some sticks and rocks or twigs or something. Little additions like that. That's what I mean by scatter terrain. And again, I'm going to go into that in this video, show you how I go about handling scatter terrain, how you can do it too. So let's jump into the video. Making use of scatter terrain is almost an art in itself, and it's a personal preference, actually, how you go about using them. In my case, I like to use them as forest floors with rocks and sticks. Store-bought lichen is perfect for putting around edges of fields and roads. Really looks the part. However, in your own backyard, take a look. You might find lots of little stones like these. In this case, I highly recommend you take stones like this from your backyard and wash them out thoroughly. Get them all nice and clean. You're good to go. Store them in an old coffee container or something of that sort. But different stones of shapes and sizes, and they're all useful for your tabletop. So that's one of the first big resources is stones from the backyard. Of course, sticks from shrubs and trees are also ideal. I don't usually go for big chunky limbs. Occasionally I do, but I like to get some of small shrubs and brush. Also bark. Some people steer away from bark, microbes and all that. I don't. If you're really concerned about that, I recommend give them a shot with the microwave. Generally, I don't keep my stuff that long or it becomes a danger. And plus, you could seal them. In this case, I got a bag of twigs and limbs, which are just perfect for me for deadfall and forest. Scattered around, it looks fantastic. And of course, I do use bark, pieces of it ground up for ground cover. And flocking material really adds to your figure the realistic look. So that's just some of the sources of material that you can find in the backyard to provide scatter terrain for your tabletop. Now, if you can, find yourself a nice variety of different colored stones. You can even go to a garden center, and they do sell various stones that you can put on your tabletop. I've got a whole slew of different types here for different settings and atmospheres in my gaming. Of course, the sticks themselves, these are just twigs from the backyard. I painted them to basically seal them. They last a long time when you do that. And they'll be just scattered about in the forest floors and wherever I want them. Of course, small stones, in this case, this is kitty litter, but you can do the same thing with small stones. These are all mashed together, basically, with white glue, painted, dry brushed, and some green flock material sprinkled on them. And as I mentioned before, get yourself some lichen. This stuff is very cheap, and it comes in different sizes and shapes, and it's highly usable for disguising edges to putting along roads and fields, as I mentioned. Something else that's also useful for scatter terrain is bark mulch, the nice thick, almost shale-like in appearance mulch. I've always found pine bark to be highly useful for that purpose. And again, people use these for basing as well as terrain making. Like I said, they do look like rocks. They could also be used in this case as scatter terrain. Again, forest floors and other locales. Now, as I mentioned, it's a personal preference how you use your scatter terrain. I like to use it for forest floors. Like in this case, I've got all kinds of things in there. Sticks and rocks and stones and other such things. Little bits of lichen as well. That's my favorite way of using it, but you can also use it for hiding any edges, like for instance on hills. In this case, lichen and some sticks really disguise the actual edges of your hills, and it looks far better And of course, you could also use it to hide edges, such as on roads, which represent hedges, really, as well as fields. And once you start playing your game and you've got all this scatter terrain all over the place, it just adds to it. Like in this case, there's fallen logs and stuff looking right. It just looks right. It feels right. And I enjoy it. So there you go, folks. That's how I utilize scatter terrain in my games to maximize the realism, or at least the look, of the battlefield. So there you go, folks. That's how I handle scatter terrain in my games. I'm like I said before, I'm a big fan of doing things on your own. Save some money, spend it on other things like actual games or rules or reference material. That's my preference. It's not for everybody, but you can go out and buy stuff and do it at your leisure. But I prefer to do it myself. And I hope you enjoyed the video. And if you have any questions about using scatter terrain or some other ideas you might have for scatter terrain, do it yourself, mind you. Leave them in the comments. I'm curious what you guys do with scatter terrain, whether or not you even bother with it, and some of the techniques or things you might have gathered that you use in your game sessions on the tabletop. So let me know, folks. Like, share, subscribe, leave me your feedback. And as always, remember, folks, hang in there. It's only going to get better.